Afternoon, everyone. Let folks get settled in here. Great. Good afternoon. Just a reminder, hello, I'm Dr. Ryan Alcantara with USC Career Services, USC Rossier Career Services, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the USC Rossier Executive Search Firm Series, K-12 edition. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Dr. David Verdugo, who is a senior partner at Leadership Associates. Leadership Associates is a California firm that supports school boards and other organizational or educational organizations in their selection of superintendents and executive leaders. And I will put a link to that organization or to them in the chat in just a minute. But as we get started, I want to let you all know that we're running this as a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar. And so we want to encourage discussion and engagement with our presenter. Please turn on your cameras if you're able to do that. And please mute your microphones for the time being. And when we do get ready for questions, raise your hand so we can, and we'll enable you to ask your questions directly. So thank you all for being able to do that. We find that it enables a little bit more dialogue and discussion when we do that. All right. Well, today we have Dr. David Verdugo, who is a seasoned education leader with 43 years of experience spanning grades K through 12. He served as a superintendent of schools for Paramount Unified School District that has over 17,000 students and is here in Los Angeles County, served in that role for 9 years. And prior to that, as an assistant superintendent of the Placentia Yorba Linda Unified School District. He has held positions of assistant superintendent, director of secondary education, principal at both elementary and high school levels, as well as teacher and coach. Dr. Verdugo is a past governing board member of AASA, the School Superintendents Association, former executive director of the California Association of Latino Superintendents, as well as the former Superintendents Leadership Academy director for the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents. Dr. Verdugo was named the Association of California Administrators Region 14th Superintendent of the Year and received the Cal State University Long Beach Outstanding Superintendent Leadership Award in 2012, the Association of Latino Administrators and Superintendents National Outstanding Educator Award in 2013, and was inducted into USC Rossier's Dean's Superintendents Advisory Group's Hall of Fame in 2020. Dr. Verdugo earned his bachelor's degree from Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington, his master's degree from the University of Laverne, and a doctoral degree in education administration from USC Rossier. Go Trojans. And Dr. Verdugo, what an amazing career. Welcome and thank you for joining us to share your story and provide some insights in working with searches and search firms as students look to pursue leadership opportunities in education and specifically K-12. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, to begin with, Ryan, thank you so very, very much for that bio. It's a little bit long, so we probably could have deleted any number of things there, but thank you. And thank you to all of you, the participants. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some knowledge. I think right now, more than ever, it's so critical to make sure that we are networking with each other, that we are certainly staying connected, and that we're sharing some of the complexities that are taking place in the field of education, regardless of whether or not it's in an administrative post, a teacher's post, a cabinet post, or that of a superintendent. In fact, I'm just going to take a quick moment to say hello to Carlos Perez in Arizona, who's on this screen. I think I saw Carlos there earlier. My former ASB president when I was the principal at El Rancho High School in Pico Rivera. That is where I grew up, as a matter of fact. I'll start with a little bit of that information. I think it's important to give just a little bit more intimate information regarding myself and that trajectory and that journey, what I often call that journey. Grew up in the city of Pico Rivera, a mother who only had a second grade education, a father an eighth grade education. And as many of you know, our families drive our values, and our families really direct and help sustain and maintain that trajectory. And that was the case with me. After a collegiate career in Washington, I came home after 4 years. I was provided the opportunity to, in fact, work where I was raised and where I was educated in the El Rancho Unified School District. I spent 22 years there, as a matter of fact, elementary principal, middle school, high school principal. I became the principal of the high school that I attended, El Rancho High School. Carlos might remember that at the age of 35, becoming the principal of your former high school, there's certainly still a lot of teachers that were there. And I needed some humility. I can recall going to my chemistry teacher and saying and demanding, actually, Mrs. Osborne, I expect those lesson plans to be on my desk by Friday. She reminded me and said, Dr. V, I'll remind you that you got a C in my chemistry class. So the point being is that along the journey, it's going to be quite interesting in terms of what we do and who we see and what that journey's like. Following 22 years in the El Rancho Unified School District, I departed the school district where I grew up, took a little bit of a gamble and became the principal at Valencia High School in Placentia Orbolinda. And I would say that gamble, and the reason I'm using that word is because it often is playing with our sensitivities and or our ideas of do I move, do I not? And it was absolutely one of the best things that I've ever done in the sense of not necessarily leaving my hometown, of course, but gathering and having the opportunity to expand my horizons with a different district. As a high school principal there, became the director of secondary ed, and then eventually the deputy superintendent. And then as Ryan mentioned, following 10 years there, I spent the opportunity to be the superintendent in Paramount Unified School District, a very urban school district. Many of you might know that area, borders Compton, right next door, as a matter of fact, Bellflower, Downey, North Long Beach. We actually served many school districts, cities, Southgate, Bellflower, North Long Beach, Lakewood, and of course, all of Paramount as well, even a little bit of Linwood there. Having spent 9 or 10 years there, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with a board of education that was particularly close. And I'll talk a little bit about more of this as we go forward, and that is the importance, if in fact your trajectory is toward a superintendency or even a cabinet member, and actually any administrative position, the relationship with your board of education. I mentioned the word complexities earlier, and certainly we're looking at many complexities that we need to navigate. But all of that being said, it was the closest thing to a marriage that I've ever experienced, ladies and gentlemen, and that being that relationship with that Board of Education. Again, I was very lucky in that I did not have a change in board for 10 years or 9.5 years while I was there. I know that Ryan mentioned that when I was there, we were at 17,000 students. I recently did the superintendent search there, and like many school districts relating to declining enrollment, they are now down to a staggering 11,000 students. So again, some of the other complexities, some of the other aspects of things that are taking place. But let me switch gears here, and I'll just end with the fact that I've done interim superintendencies as well. I was the interim superintendent in Pasadena for about 5 months. My task when I was there, just prior to COVID, was to close 3 schools, to consolidate 3 schools. So you can imagine the agenda, if you will, and some of the difficulties there. And I was also the interim superintendent in Westminster in Orange County, a small school district in Orange County there, a K-8. So I say that only so that you can be provided some sense of the scope of things. As Ryan mentioned, I am a senior partner with Leadership Associates. I've been a partner with them now for 10 years. I've completed probably about 65 searches across the state. San Francisco, Berkeley, Buena Park, ABC, Escondido, currently doing Valverde. Um, El Rancho Unified, as a matter of fact. There's so many that it's hard to remember. Lancaster, Antelope Valley, Panama Buena Vista, Bakersfield. And so I think the reason I'm saying that volume or that number is because I think it gives you a sense of, again, the nature of the job with respect to how many openings there currently are and most likely will continue to be as a result of changing philosophies or perhaps some of the political polarization that's taking place within the schools that we operate and work. So, I would like to start just basically with involving a search firm. How do you utilize that search firm? I think regardless of the position that you might be seeking. If you're familiar with EdCal, the ACSA publication, you'll notice that there's positions there from elementary positions to directors, cabinet positions, superintendencies. And the reason that they're in EdCal is because a search firm is facilitating that process. And I think it's important to understand that even though it might be a director's position and not a superintendent's position, that connection, that opportunity to engage and expand and stay connected with that search firm consultant or any number of search firms is important. Just as I mentioned earlier, that networking, it tends to operate the same way. The fact that you're showing interest, the fact that you've taken quality time to engage and call and contact, I think shows quite a bit about you as an educator. It shows a great deal about what you desire, what you want most, where you'd like to be, and again, what that trajectory is. They can help you a great deal, but I think the first step is up to you to determine the match and fit. So as you look at a potential opening, I think it's particularly important to look at whether or not it's the correct match and fit. As a matter of fact, there are times when we have site principals, which we recently did in one of my big searches, who desire to be a superintendent, and they applied for that. And so I admire the fact that that site principal contacted me, but I also had to graciously get that person to understand that it may not be the right match and fit accordingly, particularly at this point in time. So most of those searches that are either on EdJoin or EdCal, there's a position description or a job description that's attached to it. And so I think that's important to utilize that position description that typically comes from stakeholder input. Certainly the superintendent positions do, many of the cabinet positions do. So you're listening to stakeholder input that we have acquired from a variety of stakeholders, from PTA, unions, board members, cabinet members, councilmen, ed foundations, different partners and organizations. So you need to understand that it's coming from a variety of sources, which I think is important, which again, I think differentiates the fact that it might be a district-based search process versus a search firm process. And there's some outstanding search firms, please believe me. Yes, I represent Leadership Associates, but all of those search firm consultants or partners are very good friends as we have gone through this process over the years. So you'll hear the words HYA or McPherson, others as well, the Koska Group, Leadership Associates. There's many out there. But generally speaking, for the most part, we operate in similar ways. One of the things, regardless of the position that you might be seeking, that I think was going to be an important point that I wanted to make before I forget, was to examine the culture of that district, the organization. All you need to do is Google that district and or that leadership that's currently in that district, and you will be able to find out much about the politics, the philosophies, the turbulence, and the good and healthy district that it might exist there as well. I say that because, and I said leader, because it's important to understand that if you go after that position, you're actually going to be working with somebody that you're going to need to work with closely and making the determination of whether or not you want to work for that leader. What does he or she stand for? What are they driving? Are they a servant leader like yourself? What might be the organization itself, the community? What are the demographics? I personally wanted to end up my career in a place similar to where I grew up, like Pico Rivera, and Paramount certainly replicated that in many ways with the socioeconomic status, the urban flavor to it, the community itself, that type of thing. The other thing is the makeup of the board. Um, Obviously, you're all well fine-tuned with respect to what's taking place as it relates to trustees and governance teams. I just finished a search in Fairfield, Sassoon, which is about an hour out of Sacramento. 7 board members, 7 trustees. Wonderful district, in my opinion, 21,000 students, but 5 of those board members will be leaving in November. Generally, 5 of them have already determined that they will be leaving that board. So you can imagine the new person coming in and the fact that the retreats and the governance meetings and committees and so on is going to be quite hectic for that person as they create their 90-day plan. And that 90-day plan can be a plan not just for superintendents. It can be a strategy for any number of administrators, regardless of your status, your tiers, or your position, that you may want to consider. Very often, it should be done in conjunction at the superintendent level with the Board of Education. But there's others that you can deal with. If you have a close friend, an ally, a colleague in that district that you're interested in, pick their brain, talk to them, discover things, visit that school, those schools, visit that community. Those are dynamics that I think are extremely important, particularly as it relates to the politics. And again, we've seen those. I'm currently doing a small district in Santa Cruz, Live Oak School District, maybe 33,000 students. But the politics there are as big and as large as they are in Temecula Valley or Murrieta, or had been previously in Orange Unified. And I'm just being very candid with you as it relates to those things in terms of being watchful of those items. So the dynamics, positive and negative, are particularly important, regardless of the position. A high school position, a director's position, an assistant principal, a cabinet member, superintendency. You need to do your homework, in other words, is what I'm saying. That's particularly important. The I call them partners, but the consultants are there to help you. They should have a working ethic that is just that, very helpful to you to be able to answer your questions, to stay connected. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go forward. With respect to the application process, I've helped many individuals as it relates to superintendent positions, but I've also helped those as it related to director's positions. You'll recall I mentioned the position description. That describes the position that you might be interested in. So in terms of an introductory letter, it should try to mirror or match those things that are being related to you in that position description. You may have previous experience that is right on target, but that position description may also have some auxiliary things that they're interested in. And how might you make a match with that within your department or within your division or the things that you're currently doing? So they may, for example, ask for not only curriculum and instruction expertise and skill set, but they may mix into that some fiscal questions, or not questions, but rather aspects of what they'd like to see, experience or personal experiences and professional experiences. So you need to ask yourself and try to determine, what have you done on that side of the house fiscally that might be able to be elevated or elaborated to meet the match and fit of that letter accordingly? And you'll be surprised at your own site. If you're a high school principal, for example, those are cities within a city. Those have some of the same complexities that a superintendent deals with at the district level. Same thing with an assistant principal. You may be dealing with thousands and thousands of dollars as it relates to ASB. So the category of the financial aspect, there's some things that you need to do there. Are there points in that position description that relate to HR? Well, how have you been related to hiring processes and relationships, union relationships? You may not be on the district's negotiation team, but I would advise you to make sure that you reach out and put yourself on those committees and those task forces that are going to allow you to pick up that experience so that you can honestly and genuinely say that you've seen them, that you've been there, that you've operated under those things. But search firms, I think, are dedicated to helping you, those partners, those consultants, with advice, with letters of recommendation, professional references. Typically, an application will ask for 5 professional references, people that are familiar with your career. But they most often will ask that those professional references not be used for your letters of recommendation. And there's a whole litany of people that you would want to determine who you would put down on those. Obviously, a supervisor. Generally, on an application at an upper division position, they're going to literally ask you, can we go beyond the references that you've placed in your application? And if the answer is no, that's a little bit of a red flag. But I will say, with all of the complexities that are taking place, I think it's important for that consultant, that search partner, to reach out to you and get a stronger sense why you would not want somebody connected or contacted. Right now, we have a number of superintendents, unfortunately, throughout the state that have either resigned due to a number of factors or have received settlement agreements. We want to know why that took place so that we can defend and conduct a reference check accordingly that doesn't harm them. And I think that's important to point out as well. But assistance with advice, with references, with letters, who to contact at the upper tier, superintendency wise, you're going to want to have labor association folks, your immediate supervisor, and by that I mean your board president, if at all possible, people that you've worked with closely, like a city manager or an Ed Foundation person, perhaps a professor at USC. All of those combined and different categories of references make a big difference to the reader, and ultimately the reader to the hiring person, in most cases the board, or it could be a committee. We're finding that more and more districts are utilizing a variety of stakeholder committees prior to hiring processes, including assistant superintendents and directors now. That voice, that transparency is particularly important. I recently did the human resources position for a large school district, and as much as I facilitated it, I ultimately ended up inviting, as a result of the desires of that district, a wide variety of stakeholders and community members prior to the superintendent having the last process interview taking place. So I think that's important to point out. Most search firms have some kind of portal or subscription that you can connect to. In our case, with Leadership Associates, we have a subscription process where when we have an opportunity that we might be doing the search on, it gets blasted out to at least 1,000 people. So I'd encourage you to determine whether or not that's going to be the process for you folks as well. And I want to make sure that I allow some time for questions here. And those kinds of questions that you ask of those people, those search firm consultants. So for example, is there an internal candidate? Very often we tend to dance around those. But more and more boards, more and more committees are interested in comparison and contrast. Yes, there might be somebody internally that is doing very well, but they want to compare and contrast. I've seen people come to interviews who are from the district who unfortunately bomb. You would think that they would have the advantage. It would be advantageous, but in many cases, it's not. So I think that contact, I think, is important as it relates to that continuous continuity with those search firm consultants. Becoming familiar with those managing partners also is important. And I'm just going to be, again, candid. So for example, our managing partner with Leadership Associates And there's managing partners with every search firm. Dave Cash, for example, is the managing partner of one of the search firms that has recently been created. And there's others out there. The reason I say managing partner is because it's their task to make sure that they either assign a partner to you or that they provide you some insight onto that. In our case, it's Dr. Dennis Smith, a superintendent who is, in my opinion, one of the finest in the nation, certainly retired, but at the same time has a previous trajectory that has just been phenomenal, including Orlando, Florida, the 14th largest district in the nation. So those are typically who you come in contact first as you begin to inquire about those positions. But, you know, realizing that they all do run a little bit differently. They all have some of their unique aspects in terms of search processes. Many of them are based out of state, but they have assigned consultants to the state. But I would be very specific about that. Am I working with somebody who's out of state and it's all Zoom, or is it person to person? In-state firms, kind of getting a stronger sense also, which I think is particularly important as it relates to diversity and inclusion and equity, is what is the percentage of women and candidates of color? That has become a particularly important item for trustees. We also do board retreats with those governing boards and have a lot of conversations as to what they're looking for. So many consultants and partners have that information available to them, you know, at their sleeves length. They can share that with you right away if that's a particular component, if that's a particular important component to that particular group or trustee. In fact, we no longer call them governance retreats. We call them governance advances now. It's important to understand some of the wording on that as well. Receiving feedback from that partner or that consultant is important. Again, looking at how different, understanding what your trajectory is like. Have you had comprehensive experience at those various levels? I talked a little bit about that. Have you been a classroom teacher, a dean, an assistant principal, elementary, and then perhaps even some things that are somewhat preferred as a preference, a desirable. Many of those positions will literally say EDD desirable. It doesn't take you out of the running, but those are items that are desirable. You could see bilingual might be desirable. Classroom experience may be a desirable trait. So I think, again, those are things that you're going to need to look for. A little bit of going back, if I may, for a moment, and then certainly open it up for questions with the time that we have left. What is it like to try to get into that search process? I was provided the opportunity prior to becoming a superintendent. I probably interviewed 4 or 5 times, if I recall correctly. I was always the bridesmaid and not the bride in those particular searches. Although it was important, I was a finalist. I was in the final 2 and brought back for a second interview on 4 of those prior to receiving the seat. But what's important is that you have an opportunity to have feedback from those consultants after every interview, regardless of the level or the stage. If you are utilizing a consultant and they're facilitating the search, you want to understand that they should provide you some feedback. It's particularly important. After every interview, there was some fine tuning that took place, and much of the interviews when I was interviewing, 20 years ago now, are quite different in terms of what you're looking at now. There was no LCAP, there was no LCFF, mental and social emotional well-being of students. Safety was not as big of a factor as it is now. So those components that are particularly on the cutting edge now are those that you want to try to get some research on. What are they doing? How are they doing it? Have they been successful? Is there a strategic plan? Is there a graduate profile? All of those bits and pieces of information that you can find out about that will, I think, assist in determining whether or not it's a match and fit for you. But I've said quite a bit, and so I apologize for running on a little bit. Ryan, I don't know if it's good timing for you in terms of the question opportunity. I know that there were some predetermined questions that we looked at as well, but I want to throw it back to you if I may.
Sure. Thank you so much. A lot of insights there that we can certainly talk a little bit more. So we do have a list of questions from the RCPs. I encourage participants to go ahead and turn on your cameras, raise your hand if you would like to ask a question directly to Dr. Verdugo. But I do want to touch on a couple of points. So, as we talk about a search firm, you've explained those differences, and so it is something that I'll say school districts will decide. Are we going to pursue the search firm or the search process by just posting this position and posting it through normal route, or are we going to look for a search firm? So oftentimes search firms are hired because they want to get as wide a pool as possible. They may be looking at diversity. They may have had previous challenges filling the position. But one of the dynamics from an applicant's perspective is you have a different kind of relationship that with a search firm than you would with HR office or HR within the district office. What are some of those questions that candidates should really take advantage if it's a search firm and be asking that may not be so appropriate to ask for district-led searches?
Well, I think you're correct as it relates to the differences between a search firm doing or conducting the search versus a district. But I would say that I have found lately that most districts have their own unique style, although they have begun to somewhat systemize that. I'm finding that there now appears to be more of an opportunity to have a pre-determination of who's going to move forward via a Zoom process, and then a second opportunity, perhaps a written assignment, a third opportunity typically with cabinet members, and then the last opportunity, depending upon the position, with the superintendent himself or along with the cabinet member. So that's based in terms of a process you typically utilize by a district. And again, that's generally determined internally. But a lot of that is important to understand that superintendent, those people that he's delegated that task to, are the driving force behind the hiring process, and that the Board of Education is not involved in that. That's why I said to do your homework regardless of what that position might be. What I think is important also, it's a little bit of a flip side, but my point being is, if it's still a district that you're interested in and you feel comfortable contacting a search firm consultant, and I would certainly allow that in my case with you folks to get a better sense, because we work with districts in so many different ways that it might be helpful to reach out to someone like myself, or perhaps someone you already know in the search firm arena, to get a stronger sense of what is it like, and getting a little bit more insight in that district accordingly. So it can be a little bit of a double-edged sword opportunity, if you will, but Ryan is correct. Dr. Alcantara is very correct in terms that they are different. But I would say that you're going to find a different process, most often being EdJoin for many of those positions versus EdCal.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll say, the other dynamic as you're going through that process, and Dr. Verdugo, that you talked about, it's not from a candidate perspective that you have an exclusive relationship with a school district. That's true. I'm sorry, an exclusive relationship with a search firm. That's the case with school districts. But in terms of a candidate or an interested candidate you should be working through that Rolodex of search firms and adding your information and building those networks and connections. So again, to the participants, I'd really encourage you to heed that recommendation to do that. And I know you touched on some of this, but what is the typical path to superintendencies, or a few of the typical? I would kind of guess the typical path is teaching, principal, or assistant principal. But what do you see as those typical paths, and what experiences should students and alumni be doing, to strengthen their candidacy, to help them rise above as search firms are looking, or just to separate themselves out in the applicant pool?
Yeah, and Ryan is correct. There's certainly a very traditional path or trajectory that one can take. I think within that path, however, there needs to be a commitment in terms of time spent in those various positions. When either a district and or a search firm sees that there has been movement within your journey or your trajectory that is rather rapid, I think it tends to lend itself to your springboarding from one position to another. And even though they will question that, again, district versus a search firm, they will question that. It can certainly be based on promotion, but that needs to be, I think, carefully made clear to the people who are trying to do the hiring accordingly. So that traditional path, as Ryan mentioned, is classroom teacher, early entry administrative positions. I think if you jump from, let's say, teacher to a director's position at the district office level, there may be some questions about what has happened in between that time, pertaining to whether or not you had school site experience. Now, that being said, there are, of course, non-traditionalists. We've seen that very, very often in LAUSD, for example. I coached and mentored a superintendent in Duval County in Jacksonville, Florida. He was a general, as a matter of fact. But in order to kind of keep him on the straight and narrow, although he operated very, very much like a military, it was somewhat difficult, to tell you the truth. After a year of doing that, he capitulated and ended up saying, I need somebody from the traditional educational world to mentor and coach and guide me accordingly. But generally it's the Brodies or the Broad Academy people that would be those non-traditionalists that come to the top positions like superintendents across the nation. The Broad Academy being those kinds of positions that are for very, very urban positions, large school districts, 100,000, 50,000 above type thing. But I would still say that some of those leadership skills, and I would say that management comes along with leadership. I think they are intertwined. So depending upon how you've managed and how you've led those opportunities, they can come to fruition. But most that we are seeing have had a traditional route to the superintendent position. If this were 2006 and 2005, when we went through the Great Recession, most school districts were leaning towards chief business officers because that's where the turbulence was. Now we're looking at more of a, what I might call well-rounded, a variety of experiences and skill sets that the trustees or governance teams are looking for.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Again, just to remind folks, if you've got questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I'll continue down our list and highlight a couple of things that have come up. Oh, actually, Rosa, I'll go ahead and invite you to ask a question.
Thank you. Hello, Dr. Verdugo. First of all, thank you so much for doing this with us. I am a USC alumni. I started my career as a K-12 teacher became a counselor, and then transitioned to community colleges. And at a community college, at a community college. So while I was, and the reason I just kind of jumped into it is because I was actually working on my master's degree in becoming a counseling, took a Foundations of Higher Ed class. And I said to myself, oh my God, I got to be a dean. I got to go into higher ed because it just spoke to me. That class just spoke to me. And I thought I was just taking it as an elective, but here I am. And I am in the community college district. I work at Compton College. I am a faculty member there. I have been a chair there. I've been there for 10 years. And in those 10 years, I've been a co-chair for strategic planning, curriculum chair, and now I'm our division chair for the health and public services. And I'm at a point where I've served as, even previously to this, I was a basic skills coordinator and a 3CSN network coordinator for the state. So now I'm jumping into interviews for administration roles. So what advice would you give for somebody that's got like a really unique kind of, I want to say experiences and skill sets into getting into that next point? Because I am now interviewing with that, which I think is a step up, because before, I mean, you could have written all you wanted to all these jobs and you weren't getting noticed, but now I'm being interviewed. I do have a couple of interviews that we're waiting to hear back for the second interview, which is positive. But what would you say, for the next steps?
Well, I think your first comment, if I may, Rosa, was outstanding, and that is what spoke to me. That speaks volumes in and of itself. And I know that USC, the School of Rossier, is really determined to have that element, working with mind and heart accordingly. So I think the key thing there is remember why we're here, or remember why we want to be where we want to go. But I would still go back to what I think I said a little bit earlier about transferring those skill sets to the position description accordingly, and being able to somewhat exaggerate those in the application so that there is an understanding that you can transfer that, you can trade that, you can exchange that for what they're looking for as well. And even more so that you might bring some more innovative concepts and ideas as a result of that. In your case, if you're looking to get into the K-12 system, then you're not. I thought
community
you said
college, specifically community college. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was simply going to say that that articulation that is there is really important as well. I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you were currently at Compton Community College.
And I want to get into administration. I'm a faculty.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Well, I would say obviously the number of years that you have at that position speaks volumes. What you've done, being able to making sure that you're able to put a narrative together to that degree is going to be important as well. I think there's also challenges that you need to refer to as opportunities. So as you look at things that they are desiring, it's important to also understand not only the strengths, but the challenges, so that you can better articulate how you can manage those challenges. Very often we look at just the strengths of a district and kind of the litany or list of the attributes, but really the challenges are what they are looking for to manage and problem solve. I think that's the one other thing that I would throw in there as a little bit of a caveat is, how have you made your decisions? How have you problem solved? How have you created trust around the faculty and the administration that you've worked with?
Okay.
Go ahead, Rosa.
I was going to say, did you want me to answer that? Because I, as a chair, I work with faculty on everything that is required. So like if we are teaching distance ed, right, like we have a very unique situation. A lot of in-person classes are being canceled because we don't have enrollment. Enrollment is a really tough place to be right now in higher education. 6% down in all of US. California is even worse. So we're not having returning students in campuses. So one of the things that we focused on, or because I had to sit in this table, is the COVID money that we did receive. What are we doing to have it like an incentive program for students to come? So one of the things that we decided was free lunch for all. And that we've seen enrollment going up because of that. And the other one is, matter of fact, I'm going to be there Saturdays. We're doing community day, and we have a farmers market that we are encouraging the community, and our students get 20, like, I guess like a $20 coupon from just being there. If they have an in-person class, that they could actually have that. And, you know, we're trying everything for an incentive to be on campus. Because I know that's part of our strategic goals and this and the other, but we are trying to solve everything in terms of working with faculty for those of us that are going to teach distance ed, because that's how we're making load. It's actually to go through our certificate process with distance ed. So I'm working with the chair a lot and this and that, and I was part of that committee. So there's a lot of decisions that the school's making. We're making sure we're pushing all of those ideas. We're making sure faculty is, you know, we have a lot of requirements, so we're making sure that we're on top of it. And now that there's more legislation that's coming down, we're making sure that my responsibility is making sure that when there's people in, let's say, nursing, hey, BSN wants you guys to do this, is this accomplished, this, then the other. So you basically have to be that in, you know, the middle person, making sure the faculty is doing it and you're cheering them on because you're also faculty. And on top of that, you know, you're helping run a department. So, you know, there's a lot of that going on right now. And the other, I'm sorry.
Rosa, I'm sorry. I don't mean to cut you off, but I want to make sure because the context for this conversation is focused in on the community college. And so we're running short on time. So I want to provide, I'm sorry, not on community colleges, but K-12. So we did have a session with ACCT and Dr. Monte Perez. There are search firms that specialize in that area. But
Monte Perez was my professor.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, I know him real well, actually.
Great.
Yeah.
So yeah. I just want to make sure that we provide some space for some other questions, but okay, I do want to highlight a few other points. But thank you very much. And I think that's a really good kind of just in general, because we see there are similarities between the path that Rosa is talking about to community college leadership. It's similar to you know, a teacher then looking for administrative roles. And so, David, you talked about the need to look for task forces and committees. I mean, ultimately, you know, you look at that job description. If you're missing things, you can't just accept that as a liability. You have to look for opportunities to fill that in. So regardless of whether you're in the community college or teaching, you find those opportunities. I imagine professional associations provide avenues for that. Do you have any other kind of suggestions or as folks are looking to do that transition?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the nail, the head on the nail there. And that is those professional organizations, whether it's CALSA or CASA, whether it's CAPL, you know, that is affinity-based organizations, but that also helps. But I think you, the person taking the initiative to talk to your supervisor and say, hey, by the way, I'm interested in sitting in on negotiations. Or by the way, may I be a part of the fiscal process over the next few years? So taking the initiative that way, I think, is important as well.
Great. Great. And Eric, I see you have your hand up. The one thing that I will mention is we did have some questions about transitions. And so if time permits, maybe we could talk a little bit more about that of, you know, in cases of a faculty member in higher ed looking to go back to higher ed or K-12 administration. But first, let's invite Eric to ask his question.
Eric, by the way, was one of my students as well.
Wonderful.
Dr. Verdugo, always wonderful to see you. And some of the rows side, just thank you in advance just for your great insight and being here with us. And go Dons.
Thank you.
And so I have a very general question as I'm really preparing right now to ensure that my applications on EdJoin and everything else are in line. And I think what I'm wrestling with right now, and again, I think this is a minor question, in terms of looking at the requirements of qualifications, such as your letter of introduction, your resume, and many times we see that there's 3 letters of recommendation, and sometimes it puts not a maximum of 5. one of the things that I'm struggling with right now is that I have a lot of letters of recommendation, whether it be from my cabinet members right now, or whether it be a past superintendents that I've worked with over the years. A lot of people that could speak on about me, people at USC as well. And I guess my general question is how much is too much, and do I offer, other than the basic 3 letters recommendation and the 3 professional references, how much more do I provide and or give to a panel that is interviewing?
Well, the application process, you're right, only desires a certain amount. It is important nowadays to mix that, those references, whether they be professional references or letters of recommendation. So you have an opportunity to kind of mix it up, if you will. Generally speaking, though, if you're talking about advancing or going higher in the administrative ranks, like a superintendency, there's not necessarily going to be any additional information that you'll need to share with the trustees or with the search firm, unless the search firm consultant desires that. They may want to ask you independently for something that might advance your candidacy. And that's why it's always so very important to be open and honest about where you're at in your career. An example would be, I have a certain person that's a candidate right now for a position. I just most recently found out that he has been provided a March letter, or a resignation letter, basically, and he's an upper division cabinet member. He didn't divulge that. And so it makes it difficult for me to advance him accordingly. But what I would say, though, that what else is important is current letters. I think it's always been important to obtain a letter from your supervisor, whomever that might be, on an annual basis, and have that available when the application is required. If it's a superintendent position, you want that. If you're an assistant sup, you may want that from a board president, certainly your superintendent. But the current letters are particularly important. We often see this pattern of the same letters. So we know that there's just been this multitude of applications that are being put in, but they haven't taken the quality time to change or alter those letters and update them.
Excellent. Dr. Verdugo, thanks so much for that feedback. Very helpful.
Thank you, Eric.
That's a really good point. And thank you for the question, Eric. We've got time for just a couple more questions, and so I'll invite Krista to join us.
Good afternoon. My question is, what is your advice on choosing a search firm or a consultant? Is it based on someone you know? Like, for example, I had Dr. Cash for my dissertation chair, so I obviously know him very well. Do you start that way, or do you research their website? Like, what's your advice for that?
You can do both. I mentioned that on our website, we have a subscription or subscribers portal that automatically gives you 1,000. Typically, it shoots out to 1,000 folks what most recently is available. But to have that opportunity to have more of that unique, personal, intimate relationship with a professor and say, hey, what advice can you give me accordingly, is real critical. I was going to say that, Ryan, if you don't mind, and I don't mind, at some point in time, giving them the PowerPoint that I was going to utilize. I think that will flush out a lot of those things that people still might have on their mind, or questions that they might have. But if you feel comfortable, Krista, going to Dr. Cash and opening up that conversation, knowing Dave like I do, he's automatically, and of course the network of USC is so critical. That, I think, is unique in the state of California. You won't find that anyplace else, obviously.
Yeah, I believe his partner, Dr. Caruth, was also my high school principal, which is kind of cool. So similar to your story.
I know Ron very well.
Yeah.
Dr. Stu Gothold, who is no longer with the Rossier School of Education in the EDD program and PhD program, but Stu was my junior high school principal as a kid growing up in Pico Rivera. So you can imagine the relationship that we have, including him swatting me when I was a kid. Here's a guy who saved me. More of a personal story. Don't laugh, ladies and gentlemen. I stole the vice principal's car as a ninth grader, myself and 3 other guys. If it wasn't for Stu Gothold, I wouldn't be here. Let's just put it that way. Yeah. So reaching out to Dave would be very comfortable.
Thank you.
But just a reminder to folks that in terms of candidates, you know, it's not a matter of selecting which search firm you're going to work with.
Sure.
Work with them all.
Yeah.
The selection process is really school districts in deciding who is going to run and operate their search. And so we will share that PowerPoint. I had a request as well. I'll go ahead, please, Dr.
No,
Verdugo.
I was just going to share. You obviously know about EdCal. This is the latest edition. Everything from superintendent, high school principal, directors, assistant, deputies, associate supes. And so Ryan is right on target when he talks about whether it's a search firm versus a district kind of opportunity.
And Dr. Verdugo, I am happy to share the slides with everybody that RSVP'd for today's program. I had a request for your email. Is it okay that we share that?
Yeah.
Or ways to get in touch with you?
Yeah, by all means, please don't hesitate, regardless of the position. So it might be a high school position, for example, a principalship, but I might have insight on the district, the culture, the organization, healthy, unhealthy. And so if it's helpful, which I believe it is, then certainly feel free to contact me by all means.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We're coming close on the time. And so, Meliton, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask your question, but we're going to do a little bit of wrap up and then come back to that, because what we find is people drop off. So go ahead and keep your hand up and we'll give you a chance to ask your question. But before we get to the 5 o'clock hour, Dr. Verdugo, I wanted to thank you again for your willingness to come out and share both your story as well as tips for students and alumni looking to navigate their search process for superintendent and assistant superintendent roles. Are there any parting words of advice that you have for us?
Oh, gosh. I actually am more interested in listening to some of the questions that might be. I'm willing to hang on a little bit more myself, as a matter of fact.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Okay.
We'll do that. What my message for folks is, you know, don't forget career prep. Build that into your schedule and into your time, particularly if you're students. But even as you, you know, move into alumni set, you know, be thinking about what that next step is and have those conversations. Don't wait until like now I'm ready to begin the search process, because in those conversations you might find I need to strengthen up my budgeting background, or I need to do this or that other thing. And so, you know, early on, give yourself some time to develop those insights, to network with folks, have some informational interviews, all as a way to prepare for that that search process that's coming down the road.
And if I may, just with respect to what Ryan mentioned, it's particularly important. I've always maintained throughout my entire career, and particularly going in the direction of administration, what I might call a traditional mentor and a more of a contemporary mentor. Traditional meaning that somebody like a Dr. Stu Gothold, who had been through years and years of service, and then someone, when I was still in the seat, someone like Rudy Castorita, who was right at USC, or Dr. Darlene Robles, and so on, Maria Ott. Those were all people that provided assistance when I needed it in terms of any questions that I had regarding career.
Wonderful. That's great advice. So we're going to continue to take a few questions, but I'll just say, you know, thank you to everybody who joined us today. I want to share my thanks with Tom Artiaga, our Director of Alumni Engagement here at USC Rossier, who is my partner in crime in these programs. Thank you, Tom, for all your assistance, and especially to you, Dr. Verdugo, for sharing your time and insights. Again, we'll be providing information as a follow-up to this, including contact information for Dr. Verdugo, and I'll add that to the chat shortly. So a big fight on as we hit the 5 o'clock hour, and then we'll open it up and continue our dialogue here. Melitid, please join us and ask your question.
Hi, thank you for sticking around. I have a question about you at the interview process. You had mentioned, potentially a few panels. Do you have any kind of advice or insight as to what to expect with the board panel? How to present yourself, or maybe some of the more common questions they might ask?
Yeah, absolutely. That has actually changed a little bit in that when we were in COVID, you'd walk in, you'd sit down, it wasn't very personalized. Now that it's post-COVID, we're having much more of an opportunity to walk into the interview with the board, shake hands, introduce yourself. That's part of the consultant's task as well. So what I guess I'm saying is interview in itself, that big day, if you will, it's going to be in my PowerPoint. Relax. They're going to be as nervous as you very often, that board who's interviewing you. And most often, the consultants or search partners are with you in that room because we're jotting down information about your interview so that we can provide you feedback. At least the good consultants do, if I can put it that way. So get to know what the interview protocol is going to be in. Are you going to come in? Are you going to have the questions in front of you, perhaps laminated so that you can refer to them? How much time are you going to be allowed so that you do this way ahead of time so that if you're going to be provided an hour and there's going to be 14 questions, it's going to be 3.5 minutes each, maybe 4 minutes each to answer those questions. What's the format? What's the number of questions? The time allowed? If you get into a second round, what's the question? What are the questions going to be there? Very, very often less formal. What might be your opening and closing statements? Those are critical to having a good start, Milton. And the questions and themes that you can expect. What are they most interested in? Social, emotional? Are they having financial issues in that district? Has their student achievement gone down? Has it been maintained? Did they just pass a bond referendum? Do you need to be familiar with facilities? Know the key issues of the district is going to be particularly important. Go to their website, look at the bios of each board member. You'll see there that they all have these unique interests. Some of them might be interested in PTAs, others in finances, others in, leadership themselves. Typically, there will be a bio on each board member that you can see. But those opening and closing statements are really important. Try to anchor them somehow. So back when I was interviewing, if I may for a moment, there was a fiscal question. And so this particular district was having tremendous fiscal difficulties. The first thing I said to them when I got asked that question about finances and how to work through that would be, ladies and gentlemen, board members, the first thing we do is we do not panic. And that you could see in reading their body language gave them a sense of, wow, yeah, we're going to go in a direction. And then I got into the specifics about how we were going to handle a fiscal crisis. Board superintendent relations, it's a standard question now. How do you expect us to work with you and what should we expect from you? I actually said, ladies and gentlemen, I believe it's going to be the closest thing to a marriage that I've ever experienced. And that also led into the opportunity to be more specific on how and what that was going to look like. But there are a variety of standard questions regarding to HR, student achievement, financial, but then those districts that are most interested, what might they have key issues with? You can expect a question there of that.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you very much. Any final questions before we wrap things up? All right. Well, thank you again, Dr. Verdugo. In the chat, I shared a copy of the presentation. Oh, looks like we have another.
Yes, please.
We'll let Agnes join us.
Yeah. Not a question as such, but I appreciate the opportunity, realizing that it's not only for the superintendent position that you could work with a search firm, but even if you're looking for director, assistant, so we should take advantage of this. I think that was very great. And thank you so much. I look forward to this and I'm glad I came.
Great.
And again, about the networking and why we should take it important, because I've been off the radar for some time, but I think I need to get back in seriously. So thank you, Dr. Verdugo.
Thank you, Agnes, so very much. Very kind of you.
Yeah.
Anita? Did you have a question?
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. So I'm wondering about this. This wasn't mentioned. I know you mentioned career trajectory and changes in positions and so forth. But sometimes the candidates want to jump from, like, they may have worked at the district level. Like my experience is I've worked at the district level. I've also worked as a principal, and now I'm a principal, right? And so I want to transition, but I haven't had a cabinet level position. How is that usually sold to a board? Like, here's this person who hasn't had a cabinet level position, but they have various experience at district level. I'm wondering how to sell, how to pull that together to highlight certain experience that I have.
Well, as I mentioned during the process here, boards should not do the hiring. So healthy districts maintain tiers or levels of the application. Now, granted, does politics get in the way? You're damn right. And so you need to be aware of that. Money and politics are two driving forces that you need to understand and get a good handle on. So the examination of that culture within that district is going to be the first step. Do you believe you're even going to have an opportunity? And if not, maybe it's time to get out of that district and go someplace, maybe even laterally, that will allow you to springboard into something else. Those are the kinds of personal types of questions that you need to ask yourself. In fact, those are in my PowerPoint relating to the factors influencing your decision. So, is it a professional opportunity? Is the job right for you? What are the current governance situations and dynamics? Is there administrative changeover? Is it family and location? Is it compensation? Basically, you need to read the tea leaves as much as possible. Because if you truly feel that there's not going to be an advancement opportunity, then you probably shouldn't do it. But, examining those things and having some conversations with the supervisor, what are my chances? I really want to have that conversation with you. That's a healthy organization. It's hard right now. I once had a 4-1 decision by my board, and it sounds melodramatic, ladies and gentlemen, but I went ahead and I put a chair in the middle of the room. And I said, if a student were sitting there, ladies and gentlemen, what would your decision be? You're right, Dr. V. We need to start thinking about the students more and more. And every so often, as a superintendent, and I understand, Anita, what you're talking about from principal to cabinet, but every so often, there needs to be these conversations. I don't want to jump in your backyard and do your work, nor do I want you to jump in my backyard and do my work as a superintendent, that is, at that level. But those are difficult conversations, and you'd better be prepared financially and or career-wise to be able to take on what the the feedback is on that. So that's a little bit more down and dirty insight, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll put one last call out if there's additional questions, and I thank you again, Dr. Verdugo, for sticking around a little bit more. But this is your opportunity to ask a direct question as you're considering search opportunities. All right. Well, I think this is the one. But thank you again, Dr. Verdugo, for agreeing to join us here today. Thank you, everybody, for joining in on the call and making some time to have this conversation. One of the ambitions of the USC Rossier School of Education is to kind of develop equity warriors who will be out there doing God's work, and whether it's in the classroom or at the principal's desk or at the district level. And so you do that by asking questions, looking for supporters and advocates. And I appreciate you taking time to build those connections and prepare for those opportunities, because we need more leaders out there like you. And again, thank you, Dr. Verdugo, for being a part of this conversation. So,
Absolutely, Ryan. It's absolutely true. It's the legacy that you will leave. Thank you, ladies
wonderful.
and gentlemen. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. Fight on.
Right on.